Okay, guys, welcome back to part two to the first video I did. And in this, it's just going to be a continuation of where I left off. And here we go.
For his right shoulder, and he also faked the fadeaway, getting his man off balance for a beautiful step-through move to the basket. The game was really a battle between Michael Jordan isolating in the mid-range area and Karl Malone.
The argument that this Bulls team would slaughter the champion Golden State Warrior team, particularly the one where Kevin Durant was on the squad and rattled back-to-back championships, is quite laughable because as you can see on the floor here, there's the spacing doesn't compare to today's game, and there's very few players on this Bulls squad that can get their own shot.
Isolating in the low post. That's partially because of how dominant Jordan and Malone were on the offensive end. It made sense to let them isolate, but it was also partially thanks to the rule book at the time.
Because the coach Jerry Sloan focused so heavily on this pick and roll low post game with Karl Malone, they ignored the possibilities of having open 3-point shooters and making the Bulls scramble around the perimeter and pay for them sagging off here.
Let me explain to you the illegal defense rules of the 1990s. The truth is, the rules aren't easy to explain. A headline from the Deseret News in 1998 read, "Illegal defense rule is as confusing as new tax laws and full of..."
Here he's speaking about how officiating is influencing the game at the time.
There were some exceptions to illegal defense. Let's say the ball is out on the wing and a player is trying to post up on the block. If a weak side offensive player was located above the foul line, the weak side defender wasn't allowed to help in the post. But if a weak side offensive player was located below the foul line, the weak side defender was allowed to help in the post, even if the post player didn't have the ball. For the Jazz, that post player was Karl Malone, and of course the Bulls wanted to give help on it. So in response, the Jazz would space their offense like this, leaving the corner completely empty and positioning all three players above the foul line. In today's NBA, this would be pretty dumb. The lowest defender would give help, and then the two other defenders would zone up on the weak side. Because the offensive players are so close to each other, it would be an easy cover. But that was illegal defense in 1998. In fact, the Bulls got called for 4 illegal...
Look at the score. With 3 minutes and 48 seconds left to go in the first quarter. I mean... You're talking about awful offense here.
Illegal defenses in just the first half. 3 of them were because of that Jazz 3-man alignment. The illegal defense rules of the 90s fundamentally changed how the game was played. Offenses would try to game the system by strategically...
Once again here, there's no use of the corner 3-point shot, which is so prevalent in today's game. This would allow the Jazz to stretch this Bulls team out. And they had Ron Harper, who was older at the time, 34 years old, 6'6". Michael Jordan, who's 34, 6'6". And this allowed them to basically camp out, shade help toward Karl Malone, camp out in the lane, shade help toward the lane, and never have themselves fully extended as if the Jazz would have, fully extended if the Jazz would have utilized the corner 3-point shot.
Placing players on the weak side above the foul line. And defenses would do their best to adapt while staying within the rules. It all led to a lot of isolation and standing around on offense. And in my opinion, it limited creativity. The Jazz ran the same plays with the same spacing over and over again in the finals to isolate Karl Malone. Eventually in 2001, the illegal defense rules would be legislated out of the NBA, which brings us to the next decade. Before we get into the 2004 finals, let's take a minute to get our bearings for where we are in NBA history. During the inaugural season in 1947, the league average was just 68 points per game.
Look at this. Look at this. You know, so with you old school guys, right? How far do you want to go back in history and claim your guys as being all-time greats? When you can see here, and we're going to get to a couple of decades in my era too, and some of the offense was pretty bad. But wow.
However, scoring steadily increased throughout the 1950s. By 1962, the league was averaging
Okay, here the old school guys will make the argument. You see, 1962, 119 points a game.
119 points per game, which is still an all-time record to this day. Scoring then stayed steady in the 70s and 80s. The average hovered around 108 or 109 points, but then the 90s hit. In 1997, scoring went below 100 points per game for the first time since...
This is the era which I spoke of in the first installment of this video, in part one. This is the era that was hard on the eyes, man, hard to watch. Coaching had evolved, athleticism had evolved, but shooting skill and the use and emphasis of the three-point shot was still not there.
1956. That started an 11-season period where the league average was below 100 each year. 2004 was perhaps the lowest point for offense. Not only was the league average just 93 points per game, but the NBA title was won by the defensive-minded Detroit Pistons. This is a list of the 10 lowest scoring champions of all time. 9 out of the 10 teams on the list are from 1955 or earlier.
Hang on, folks. This is the Bootleg Studios after all. Right during the damn recording of the video, I'm going to adjust it. It's a little crooked. Doing my best. This is not a perfect setup. Alright? But, yeah. Please forgive me. This is why I call it the Bootleg Studios. Oh, it's still a little crooked. There we go.
The only exception is the 2004 Pistons. Despite winning a ring, Detroit averaged just 90 points per game. And they did it with an elite level defense. With the illegal defense rules gone, players were now free to give help without worrying about being called for a technical foul.
This is where the era when a lot of zone defense was being played. The three-point shooting skill was not at the level that it is today, and the coaches' reins was still on players, meaning they weren't allowing bigs to freely shoot threes at this point neither.
Pistons defense revolved around that help. Whenever Kobe had the ball, the defender one pass away would shrink the floor, forcing Kobe to either pass or drive into traffic. Watch how Tayshaun Prince is pointing toward...
I want to make a note. This 2004 champion Detroit Pistons team would not be competitive today.
It's the middle here. He wants Richard Hamilton to get into his help position so he can send Kobe's drive towards the middle. By constantly shrinking the floor, the Pistons held Kobe to just 38% shooting during the series and beat the Lakers in 5 games. Watch how the Pistons defended Kobe's ball screens. Rasheed Wallace is hedging here, putting 2 players on the ball. But even when Kobe splits the screen, Chauncey...
The guy in the corner is wide open. In today's game, the ball would swing over and either the guy would have a wide open shot or he would pump fake Rip Hamilton off the ball and drive it for a floater or a dunk.
Phillips is right there to give more help. That's 3 players on the ball. In today's spaced-out three-point shooting NBA, it's hard enough to get away with putting 2 players on the ball, let alone 3. But in 2004, the Lakers just didn't have the shooting or spacing to make the Pistons pay for loading up to Kobe. Instead, you had possessions like this, where Phil Jackson's triangle offense led to all 4 players roaming around the paint. And the lack of three-point shooting from the Lakers' 4-man Slava Medvedenko only made things worse. Ben Wallace and Rasheed Wallace were able to roam the paint and help.
How did Medvedenko even get playing time in the finals? Yeah, that Laker team wasn't their best self, and they definitely didn't have the shooters.
Help out on Shaq instead of guarding Medvedenko out on the perimeter. So with the illegal defense rules gone, defenses had gotten smarter. Isolation basketball wasn't as effective because of the ability to help on defense. And the problem in the early 2000s was that the offenses didn't adapt quickly enough. The best way to make a defense pay for helping on the ball is to space the court and pass to open three-point shooters. Yet the Lakers averaged less than 5 threes per game during the finals. Something had to change with the way offense was played. Before we move on to
a lot of this too, folks, what he's not mentioning is during certain periods in time, there is a drought in talent. And it happens in every league in sports. Every now and then, there's a drought in talent. Or the talent that is there has, unfortunate injury problems. And so they're not even able to be on the court. But during this period, there was a talent drought in the NBA, which led to a lot of this poor shooting.
the next decade, here's just a quick montage of how absurd Shaq was in the post. Even with the lack of offensive spacing, Shaq shot 63% from the field while leading the Lakers in scoring at 27 points per game. It's fun to just watch defenders bounce off of him or go to ridiculous measures to foul him. Just imagine him in the modern NBA with 4 shooters around him. It's not exactly a secret that the NBA game...
Now, we go to the next era in the 2010s, and he highlights how LeBron James and the Miami Heat basically kicked off the small ball era, spacing
LeBron,
the floor.
Causing Russell Westbrook to help on the roll, opening up a catch-and-shoot 3 for Norris Cole. The very next possession, the Heat went right back to the same play, with LeBron again finding Cole for an open 3. Spacing the court with shooters and setting a spread ball screen has taken over the modern NBA. But in 2012, the whole league wasn't completely there yet. The Thunder, for example, also set plenty of ball screens, but notice how different the spacing is from the Heat. As Westbrook dribbles into the paint, OKC doesn't space out to the perimeter, they duck in the paint. Here's an example of Kendrick Perkins getting a bucket off of the duck-in. So yes, both teams did use ball screens, but spacing...
Kendrick Perkins was an offensive liability for this Thunder team.
Wise, the 2020 finals was a battle between old school and new school. The Heat were new school, playing LeBron at the 4 and putting shooters around him like Shane Battier.
This lineup basically started the small ball era, with LeBron playing the 4 and the 5 at times, and Battier playing the 4 as well as the 3, and Bosh playing all 3 front court positions as well. Basically changed how the NBA's the style of play offensively to this day.
Battier or Mike Miller off the bench. The Thunder were old school, playing 2 traditional bigs together in Perkins and Serge.
Ibaka could knock down a 3-point shot, but at this point in time was not shooting them at a large clip. He was only taking maybe 2 or 3 a game. In today's NBA, he's still playing, he would take more than that. And Kendrick Perkins, like I said before, was an offensive liability, just basically there to get offensive rebounds and set screens.
One way the Heat utilized their small ball lineup was by using the horns formation. In horns, Miami would put their shooters in the corners, in this case Battier and Miller, with LeBron and Haslam out at the elbows. Again, notice the open paint. Here the play was just a simple double screen for Mike Miller. And this time down, the Heat again went right back to the same play, but watch what LeBron does when Miller isn't open. He clears him out to the corner, gets his 3 shooters aligned on the perimeter, and then finds the open man when OKC shrinks the floor. This is
a philosophy where you're playing to get an open 3 instead of playing to get an open 2. It's basically a difference in basketball psychology and strategy. You're looking to drive the ball to create room for an open 3, whereas before you would have guys shooting the 3 to open space inside, which in all reality both happens.
same type of defense that Kobe faced against the Pistons, but the antidote was three-point shooting and spacing. In fact, Mike Miller himself had 7 3-pointers in this game. He had 0 twos to go along with those 7 threes, a sign of the changing times. Overall, the Heat as a team made 14 threes. By comparison, the most the Lakers...
As the players get more athletic, and are able to cover more ground defensively, it just made sense for coaches to allow players to extend the floor and space the floor and shoot more threes to keep a lot of these athletic players at bay and keep them scrambling around on defense.
Made in a finals game during 2004 was just 6. LeBron himself didn't make a single three during Game 5, but I'd argue he's the best passer in NBA history at finding spot-up shooters on the perimeter. No one is better at drawing the defense towards him and then manipulating it to find the open shooter.
Well, that's only because guys like Isaiah Thomas, John Stockton, Kevin Johnson, Magic Johnson, all these other great point guards in history, they didn't play in an era where guys were freely spotting up and shooting threes. Because if that was the case, NBA history might be a little different, particularly for guys like John Stockton.
Than LeBron. At times, that willingness to find the open man has even sparked criticism of James from people who want him to be more aggressive as a scorer. But when his teammates are hitting the open shot like they were in this game, it's hard to argue with the results. He finished with 13 assists and a triple-double.
LeBron is basically a point guard that has the size of a power forward.
Dwayne Wade wasn't a three-point shooter for the Heat either, but D-Wade and LeBron were so good at cutting off of each other. Instead of spotting up on the perimeter, they'd use those basket cuts to get down.
Both D-Wade and LeBron, and I'm also going to include Chris Bosh, all three of those guys have high basketball IQ.
Hill into the paint. And that all brings us to our final decade and the current year, Warriors-Celtics 2022. Chances are, if you've made it this far in the video, you're a pretty big basketball fan. And you probably already have a good feel for what the current NBA is like. If you're a subscriber...
Jack him up, jack that three-point shot up.
Subscriber to the channel, I've also already done... Versatility is now more important than 5-out spacing. In this year's finals, we saw plenty of switching and 5-out from the Warriors and Celtics. As a result, versatility is now more important than ever. It's hard to be on the court during the playoffs in 2022 if you can't switch.
It's what makes veterans like Al Horford still able to play at a high level and be effective, because Al Horford, playing the center position, can shoot the corner three, can shoot shoot at the three at the wings, at the top of the arc, as well as make the pass from the post, the high post, the low post. So this is how today's game has changed, definitely from years past. The center position hasn't gone away. It's just morphed into a different skill set.
Screens and guard multiple positions. Otherwise, you're going to be targeted in mismatch situations. Offensively, of course, the superhuman shooting of Steph Curry has changed the game. Players are taking more off-the-dribble threes than ever before, and you certainly can't get away with the sagging on-ball defense of the 80s and 90s against the league's top shooter.
See, that shot right there is why this Golden State Warrior team would give fits to any of the teams in the previous eras, because they were not coached to come up and guard that shot. And they would get burnt over and over and over again. Maybe they might be able to close out on it, but the ball would swing. So, I don't know. What do you think?
It was fun to watch Marcus Smart's physical ball pressure against Steph and the rest of the Warriors guards. The Celtics as a collective are as aggressive and physical as any defense I saw while making this video. Teams do still strategically sag off of non-shooters. Peyton Pritchard is out well above the three-point.
Now, as you can see, the small ball era is in full effect. Right here, there's not a 7-footer on the court. There's not even a guy 6'11" on the court. There's barely a guy 6'10" on the court right now, and this is between both teams. And this is because it's so important for today's bigs to be able to come and switch out defensively on that three-point shot.
Line to take away Jordan Poole's jump shot, but instead the Celtics are able to sag off of Andre Iguodala, giving help in the paint on Poole while at the same time daring a three from a below-average shooter. By sagging off of a non-shooter like Iguodala, it can help you contain the shooters.
Now, I will say, this example of today's game wasn't the best because these two teams that made it to the finals, the Celtics and the Warriors this year, I would say both of them weren't the best representation of today's game. The Warriors limped to the finals. They had a lot of injuries. Clay was coming off a horrendous injury. He's still really not fully back. They relied on their guts, their experience, and their grit, and of course their skill to make it to the finals. And with some good fortune, LeBron didn't make the playoffs this year. And you had a couple of injuries on teams out west as well as out east.
Trajectory of Al Horford's career might just show how much the game has changed more than anything. The first 7 seasons of his career, he made a total of 10 3-pointers. The next 7 seasons, he made 500.
But look at the attempts. The first 7 years, only 29 attempts. But as you can see, as the game is morphed into a more of an outside shooting game, or you have to have the ability to make the outside shot. And this is how Al Horford has hung around and played this long. And is still playing at an extremely high level because of his development of this three-point shot. And this is where I'm going to leave it, folks. This is part 2 of the series that I'm just created. And let me know what you think in the comment section about the evolution of the game between the 50s and now. All right, this has been Rant Roller Sports. Peace.